Good morning. The last few weeks we have been speaking of holiness, and as we have done that, we have spent a lot of time in the book of Exodus. In chapter 19, we're going to return there. But as we have taken a look at holiness, we understand that there are a lot of different aspects of holiness that maybe we don't always consider, that maybe we don't find some things. I've been looking at the concept of awe and movement, and for me, for some reason, and maybe I've used an awful lot of images of thunderstorms, but thunderstorms are that way for me. They move, and we have no control of them. We wish we would, but we really don't. These thunderstorms come and they move and they shoot lightning across the sky, and they're powerful reminders that we are not in control of things. And so as I think about the Exodus picture of God descending on the mountain in smoke and storm, I see this, and I have this imagery, and this is what calls to mind. And so this holiness, what we have to understand is that God moves. It's not just a static thing that is crystalline, that just stays put, but it is movement. It is something that he does. And so we talk about his cleanliness. And so we talk about his movement, and we talk about his awesomeness. And in that awesomeness, we're talking about that part of him that is dreadful, that part of him that is scary to us, really. Let's talk about it in those terms. And so as we close off this little section on holiness and God's holiness, I want us to think about all these things. But I think that the other thing, the question that we ask when we think about his holiness is, who is like you, God? Who is like you? And the resounding answer is no one. And as we take a look at this aspect of God, what we realize is that in his holiness, there is something that is totally other about God. There is something that is totally different from anything else that we know, from ourselves, from the world around us, or anything. He is other. He is apart. He is separate. And in that, we see a God who is amazing in all sorts of ways, that fills us with awe, who moves in ways that we can't even imagine, who is clean beyond all reckoning. He is all of these things. And in Exodus 15:11, we have this Song of Moses, and we've referred to this several different times, and we talked about all of what is going on in God bringing his people out of Egypt. And I love the songs that Jamie has led, because they're in these themes of God bringing us to Jordan and doing those types of things. And when we see all this, and it says in verse 9 of chapter 15 of Exodus, the enemy boasted, I will pursue, I will overtake them, I will divide the spoils, I will gorge myself on them, I will draw my sword, and my hand will destroy them. But you blew your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. And the question again that Moses asks is, who among the gods is like you, O Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders? Do we see all of this, all of these things that we've talked about, that God is majestic in holiness, awesome in glory? When we think about the Red Sea covering over that army, this is a horrific thing. And in his holiness, he moved and he acted in this particular time, and he still moves and he still acts. And so as we take a look at this, there is no God like God. And we see that God has revealed himself to be that God who is like no other God. And so when God descends on the mountain, when he descends on Mount Sinai, when he has brought his people to Mount Sinai, and he is going to reveal himself to them, when he is going to give them the law that is going to bind them to himself, when we see all of that, we see what he has done. On the morning of the third day, this is verse 16, and we've read this before, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain, Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. And Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. And as the people are approaching God, as they have come to Mount Sinai, they can only think one thing, that this is like something that we have never seen before. He is unlike anything that we have ever seen. We can take a look at other passages. I'm going to go to the Daniel passage. And when we take a look at what is going on here, God reveals himself to Daniel. And he does this in powerful, amazing ways. And in chapter 10, verses 4 through 6, what we find is Daniel has several visions. And he is seeing things that are in the future. And he's seeing all of these things. But God is revealing himself to Daniel. And it says, on the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of the finest gold around his waist. His body was like chrysolite, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of the multitude. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. The men with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and I listened to him. I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed. And he goes on and he talks about this vision, and he talks about the voice, and it says in verse 12, I'll continue. Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I am about to speak to you, and stand up, for I have now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling, and he says, do not be afraid. And so we see that what is happening is there is a vision, and this vision is unlike anything that Daniel has ever seen before. We can take a look at the Ezekiel passage in Ezekiel chapter 1, 25 through 28. We know this passage. We've gone through this one again. And the vision that we see of God is one that is high and mighty and different than anything we have seen. We've seen that he is surrounded by these heavenly beings, wheel within the wheel. We see all of these things. And then we find what God looks like, how he reveals himself in this. And he says, then there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads as they stood with lowered wings, these angels. Above the expanse, over their heads, was what looked like a throne of sapphire, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal as if full of fire. And that from there down, he looked like fire. And brilliant light surrounded him, like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell face down. And I heard the voice of one speaking. When we take a look at this, and the image that we have here, what we see going on here is unlike anything that has ever been seen before. He's different. There is no God like God. We understand that Jesus, as the incarnation of God, is like the Father in every single way. And so John, we're not going to go to the Isaiah passage, we know that one. But John, when he is speaking of the revelation that he received from God, he talks about what is going on here, and he starts about his suffering, and he talks about what is going on. This is in Revelation chapter 1, verse 9. It says, I, John, your brother and companion in the suffering and kingdom and patient endurance that are ours in Jesus, was on the island of Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. On the Lord's day I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet, which said, write on a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And I got this vision here of John. He is this way, and he hears a voice behind him, and he's going to turn around. And so he turns around. And he does this to see the voice that was speaking to him. And John says, when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet with a golden sash around his chest. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held the 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp double-edged sword. His face was like the sun, shining in all its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. There is no God like God. There is no God like God. And his people have acknowledged him to be this. We hear this in the Song of Moses that we saw in Exodus chapter 11, but we also see it in passages like Isaiah 46:9. And what is going on there is God is talking about how they have set up idols and they have set up gods, so to speak, and those gods are not really God. And what Isaiah has written here in chapter 46 and verse 9 says, "Remember the former things, those of long ago, I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please." This is God in action. This is God moving. This is God in all of his holiness, working in his world and doing what he has accomplished. And I think about us and all the things that we may have in mind, all the plans that we may have laid in store, all the things that we would like to do. And a fraction of them happen. We accomplish a little bit in our lifetime. And we can say, yes, we've accomplished this goal, we've accomplished that goal. But God's purposes are always fulfilled. He is unlike us in all these ways. In Deuteronomy, and we're skipping around in Deuteronomy chapter 33, this is still the words of Moses. And he is talking about the tribes of Israel, and he's talking about the blessings that they will have and all of that which is going to go on as they enter the promised land. But we have in Deuteronomy chapter 33, 26 through 29, these words. "There is no one like the God of Jeshurun, who rides on the heavens to help you, on the clouds in his majesty. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemy before you, saying, destroy him. So Israel will live in safety alone. Jacob's spring is secure in a land of grain and new wine where the heavens drop dew." And we see that what, again, God is doing is he is moving in powerful ways. "Blessed are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord. He is your shield and helper and your glorious sword. Your enemies will cower before you, and you will trample down their high places." And we see, so what is going on here, that the people of Israel are acknowledging God for his power, for his might, for his holiness, for what he accomplishes and what he will accomplish. In 1 Samuel, we have the story of Samuel and his birth. And Hannah was childless, and she asked God for a son. And the man of God said, "You will have a son." And then she praises God after she does this, after she has the son. And it says, "And Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoices in the Lord my horn is lifted high. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one beside you. There is no rock like our God." And then she continues and she talks about all the things that people talk about, all their pride and everything that people try to accomplish, but it is the Lord who accomplishes his tasks. It is the Lord that does his will. I have messed up the road. I think it's fixed. Don't worry about it. I'm good. But I think that what we see in all of this is one of his purposes was that he was going to set his people apart. And when we see what he is going to do, we see that he sets his people apart for purposes, and he wants to make sure that his purposes are secure. And so when we take a look at Leviticus, for example, in 20, 24 through 26, it has this to say. And there are all sorts of things that it is talking about not living according to the customs of the people in the land and all of this. And it says, "Keep all my decrees and laws," and this is Leviticus 22, "and follow them, so that the land where I am bringing you to live, may not vomit you out. You must not live according to the customs of the nations I am going to drive out before you. Because they did all these things, I abhorred them. But I said to you, you will possess their land. I will give it to you as an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has set you apart from the nations. You must therefore make a distinction between clean and unclean, animals between unclean and clean birds. Do not defile yourself by any animal or bird or anything that moves along the ground. Those which I have set apart as unclean for you. You are to be holy to me, because I, the Lord, am holy, and I have set you apart from the nations to be my own. So he has taken his people, and he has taken them to be his prized possession, to be holy like he is holy. We see this also in Psalm 4:3. For some reason, my fingers just are not going fast enough today. I apologize. In Psalm 4, verse 3, it says, know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call him. In 2 Corinthians 6:17, we have much the same thing, and God is talking about what is going on with his people as Christians. And as we see that this is a theme that is continued throughout the Bible, it talks about this separateness, and it says, therefore come out of them and be separate, says the Lord. And this is the exact same thing that Revelation 18:4 says. Come out of them, my people, and don't be part of who they are in their unholiness. You are set apart. You have been chosen. You have been made to be the people of God. What does this mean? Well, one of the things that it means is that we will definitely look different than those who are around us. We have talked about holiness, and the reason why I even started on this theme again is because, again, I am concerned that we as Christians, we as the people of God, may be losing our focus when we talk about holiness. That may be that we are looking way too much like the world. And in fact, I know that this is the case. When I hear the talk among Christians, does it sound different than the talk that we hear among people who are not Christians, people who do not wear the name of Christ? Does the life look different? And so what we find, the Bible says, is that when we are called apart to be holy as God's people, we will look different. Ephesians 4, and I'm going to read several of these little passages here, and I've thought about maybe going and expanding on these next week. I haven't decided exactly what I want to do with this. But as I take a look at this, I see Paul, and he is talking to the Christians in Ephesus, and he says, so I tell you this, and insist on it, in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more. You, however, did not come to know Christ that way. Surely you heard of him and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off the old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. We are called to this. As Paul continues in Ephesians, he gives very specific examples of how we are to talk, about how we are to walk, about what we are to do, how we are to act, how we are to interact with one another. He talks about all of these things. But I'm going to skip to 5:3-13. And in 5:3-13, he says, but among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality, or of any kind of impurity, or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Nor should there be obscenity, foolish talk, or coarse joking, which are out of place, but rather thanksgiving. For of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person, such a man as an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, because of such things God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient. Therefore, do not be partners with them. And I love this. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. For the fruit of light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth, and find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything exposed to the light becomes visible. And so we see what is going on here is we see that God is calling his people to holiness, to be his people. He has called us out of darkness, and he has made us a nation. He has made us a people to live and to be. In 1 Peter 2, we see more about what God is desiring for his people. And in 1 Peter 2, 9 through 12, I'm going to go through this very, very briefly, but I love how one of the songs that we sang today had to do with us being pilgrims and being foreigners, because this passage has everything to do with that. And it says, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation." See all of those things? A people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. And so we see that part of our purpose in being called to this holiness, to be called into God's purpose, is to praise. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world to abstain from sinful desires which war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. And so we see that God, in all of his holiness, is quite other than anything that we have seen on earth. We see that he is different than any other power that has ever been set up. We see that he is awesome. We see his might. We see his movement. We see his cleanliness. We see all of that. And God is calling us to be his people, and to be his people means that we also must be holy. And therefore, we live a different life than the lives that we see around us. And we do this in order that other people may praise him and may come to also be his people as well. Called to holiness. I believe we are going to go into a little bit more detail next week about what this means. But if you've decided that this day you want to be holy, that you want to be his person, there is no time like the present. If you're at home and you're wanting to make that decision, please give us a call. We will make sure that it happens. Please come whenever you need.